At the very moment I spotted my son raising champagne with the woman who had always called me temporary family. I still had his voice from that morning in my ear. "Dad, I'm boarding for Denver." "Thanksgiving dinner," he said, was impossible. Yet there he sat at the Harbor Lantern, laughing beside Vanessa and her billionaire mother. I didn't shout, I didn't shake. I opened my phone under the table and the first card declined before dessert reached them. Then, his smile finally died. I woke before sunrise, as old men do when sleep stops pretending it can solve anything. Boston was still dark beyond the windows of my 10th-floor apartment, the harbor only a smear of black glass between the buildings. For 43 years. Thanksgiving morning had begun with Elaine opening every cabinet in the kitchen and accusing me of hiding the cinnamon. She would have her radio playing too loudly, flour on one cheek, and that little half-hum she made when she was happy enough not to notice she was happy. 5 years after her funeral, the apartment had learned a different sound. Nothing. I made coffee because habit is a kind of scaffolding. It keeps a man upright after the rooms inside him have started to collapse. I drank it black at the dining table, where I had set 2 places the night before without thinking. 1 plate for me. 1 across from me, empty, shining under the weak morning light like an accusation I was too tired to answer. On the bookcase beside the window sat the photograph I could never move. Andrew was 6 in it, perched on a steel beam inside my old fabrication shop, wearing a hard hat and grinning like I had handed him the whole world. Elaine had taken that picture the summer I taught him how to read a tape measure. He used to look at me as if my hands could fix anything: a bicycle chain, a cracked stair, a bad dream. I picked up my phone and stared at his name. A father can know he is about to be disappointed and still press call anyway. Hope is stubborn that way. I let the phone ring long enough to imagine him ignoring it, then short enough to forgive him before he answered. Andrew picked up on the 4th ring. "Dad," he said, already breathless. "Happy Thanksgiving." The words were right. The warmth was missing. "Happy Thanksgiving, son." I kept my voice easy, trying not to sound as lonely as I felt. "I was thinking we could have dinner tonight. The Harbor Lantern still has that turkey Elaine loved. You, Vanessa, Mason, me, nothing fancy, just family." There was a pause, not the pause of a man checking his calendar. The pause of a man choosing which lie would be easiest to carry. "Dad." "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't tonight. Something blew up with the Denver project. The investors want me there in person. I'm heading to Logan in a couple hours." "On Thanksgiving?" "I know. Believe me, I hate it." He lowered his voice, like someone else might hear him pretending. "It's one of those things I can't push. If this deal slips, months of work go with it." I looked at the empty plate across from me. Elaine would have noticed how straight the fork was. "Of course," I said. "Business is business." "We'll do next weekend," he said quickly. "I'll bring Vanessa and Mason. We'll make it proper, I promise." A promise should have weight. His landed like paper. "All right, Andrew, fly safe." "Thanks, Dad. I'll call when I land." After he hung up, I kept the phone against my ear, listening to nothing. Underneath his polished excuse, I had heard the boy I raised. The terrible part was realizing he had used that voice to deceive me. I sat there after the call, looking at the empty place, setting as if it might offer advice. The apartment held its breath around me. For a minute, I nearly cleared the table and spent the evening with canned soup and football highlights. The way lonely men convince themselves they are being practical. Then my eyes drifted to the hallway closet. Elaine's gray wool coat hung inside, brushed clean, still carrying the faint cedar smell from the garment bag. She had bought it for our 40th anniversary and told me, "Wear this when you need to remember who you are." I put it on slowly. If Andrew could choose absence, I could choose dignity. Thanksgiving still mattered. I still mattered. So I called the Harbor Lantern and made a reservation for 1. Cal Morgan had worked the front desk of my building since before my knees predicted rain. He looked up when the elevator opened and gave the nod men give each other when too much history makes words awkward. "Evening, Mr. Whitaker," he said. "You look dressed for something serious." "Dinner at the Harbor Lantern." His eyes softened. "Andrew meeting you there." There it was. Asked kindly and cutting anyway. "Business trip," I said. "Denver." Cal did not comment. Good men know the value of leaving silence unfilled. He came around the desk and held the glass door open while cold rolled in from Atlantic Avenue. "Let me get you a car." Holiday traffic's ugly near the harbor. The sedan arrived with rain shining on its roof and Motown playing low through the speakers. I sat in the back and watched Boston slide by in wet reflections brick storefronts. Office towers? Families hurrying under umbrellas with foil pans held against their coats. Everyone seemed to be carrying something towards someone. The driver took the long route past water. I did not correct him. Elaine and I used to come this way whenever we wanted to pretend we were younger than we were. The last time had been our 41st anniversary. She wore a cream scarf that kept slipping loose. And every time I reached to fix it, she accused me of flirting like a teenager. We sat by the window at the harbor lantern and ordered the cheapest wine because she said rich people never knew how to enjoy a bargain. I could still see her hand on the table. Ring turned sideways the way it always did when her fingers were cold. I could still hear her laugh when harbor wind rattled the glass. By the time the restaurant lights appeared ahead, warm and golden against black water, I had almost convinced myself the night might be survivable. Not happy, not whole, but survivable. Then the car stopped beneath the awning, and I stepped out wearing my best coat, carrying my grief like a gentleman carries an old wound. The harbor lantern looked carved out of warm light and old money. Tall glass walls faced the black harbor, catching every candle on every white tablecloth until the whole room seemed to float above the water. A pianist played something soft near the bar. Waiters moved without hurry, and every laugh in the dining room sounded polished, as if even happiness had dressed properly for Thanksgiving. Marianne, the manager, recognized me before I reached the host stand. She was in her 50s, silver pinned into her dark hair, with the calm face of someone who had rescued 1,000 difficult evenings. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, taking both my hands. "It's been far too long." It has. Her eyes flicked to the empty space beside me, and sadness crossed her face before professionalism returned. "Mrs. Whitaker always loved the harbor view." "She did," I said. "Tonight it's just me." Marianne did not pity me. She simply nodded and led me toward a window table where the water waited, dark and patient, as if it already knew everything. We had nearly reached the window table when my eyes caught a flash of burgundy silk near the private alcove. I stopped walking. Andrew sat at the largest round table in the room, the one half hidden behind brass screens and winter flowers. He was not in an airport. He was not in Denver. He was leaning back in a new navy suit, laughing with a champagne flute lifted in one hand, like he had never made a phone call that morning at all. Beside him, Vanessa glowed in a pearl-colored dress, her dark hair swept over one shoulder. Across from them sat Lenora Blackwell, Vanessa's mother, straight-backed and diamond-bright, presiding over the table as if she owned the restaurant, the harbor, and every person breathing near it. Wrapped gifts covered one side of the table. A cake sat in the center, white frosting, gold letters, perfect candles. "Happy 39th, Vanessa." For a few seconds, I could not hear the piano anymore. I could only hear Andrew's voice from that morning. "I'm heading to Logan in a couple hours." Marianne turned back and saw my face. "Mr. Whitaker." I looked at my son laughing across the room. "No," I said quietly. "Not that table." Marianne did not ask questions. She adjusted the angle of her body, shielding me from the room with the grace of someone who understood disasters before they announced themselves. "I have another table," she said softly. She led me to a two-top, partly hidden behind a tall arrangement of pine branches, roses, and eucalyptus. From there, I could see Andrew's table through the gaps, but unless someone was looking for me, they would pass right over me. I sat with my back to the harbor and my face toward my son. My hands surprised me. They did not tremble. The grief was there, yes, and the humiliation too, but beneath both was something colder. Recognition. A man can forgive being forgotten. It is harder to forgive being deliberately edited out. Marianne brought a glass of Cabernet without my asking. "From the house," she said. "Thank you." I held it by the stem and watched Andrew perform. That was the word for it. Perform. He leaned forward when Lenora spoke, laughed a half-second too quickly, touched Vanessa's wrist at the right moments. Every gesture said, "Look at me. I belong here." I wondered when my son had decided that belonging required pretending his father did not exist. Vanessa looked beautiful and brittle, all pearl fabric and careful posture. She smiled the way people smile when photographs might be taken. Lenora sat at the head of the table, though it was not her birthday, not her reservation, and not her name over the door. Women like Lenora never needed ownership papers. They entered rooms and waited for the rooms to surrender. I remembered the first Christmas after Andrew married Vanessa. Elaine had brought homemade cranberry bread wrapped in blue ribbon. Lenora had thanked her and said, "How charming. I always admire practical women." Elaine squeezed my hand under the table and kept smiling. Later, in the car, she stared out the window and said, "Tom, some people make kindness sound cheap." Across the room, Lenora lifted her glass. Andrew bent toward her like a man waiting for approval. That was when I understood this was not one lie. It was years of training my son to be ashamed of where he came from. Then Mason appeared near the restrooms, and the knife found a softer place to enter. He was 15 now, tall in that awkward way boys get when their bones outrun their confidence. His shirt was tucked in on one side, tie slightly crooked, hair combed with more effort than success. He walked toward the table holding a small gift bag, smiling like a kid who had been told this night was simple. "Mom," he said, bending to kiss Vanessa's cheek. "Happy birthday." Vanessa's face changed when she saw him. For 1 second, all the polish fell away, and she was just a mother looking at her boy. That almost made me forgive her. Almost. Mason handed her the gift, then pulled out his phone to take a picture of the cake. Andrew stepped in beside him, showing him how to frame the candles, how to catch the harbor lights behind the frosting. Their heads bent close together, father and son, and the resemblance hurt. Andrew had stood like that at 15, too. Shoulder forward, grin ready, believing the world could still be negotiated by charm. Mason never looked my way. That was what broke me most. Not Andrew's champagne, not Lenora's diamonds, not the private table I had not been invited to. It was my grandson standing 40 feet away, innocent and happy, unaware that his grandfather was eating alone in the same room on Thanksgiving. Children do not forget old men who taught them to bait fishing hooks and drive nails straight. They do not stop asking questions unless someone trains the questions out of them. I wondered what Andrew had told him, that I was tired, sick, difficult, that I preferred solitude because loneliness sounded more respectable when renamed. Mason lifted his phone, smiling, and I understood my son had not just lied to me. He had made the boy carry the lie without knowing its weight. Lenora's voice rose above the piano, smooth enough to sound accidental. "Honestly," she said, smiling toward Vanessa's friends, "a celebration feels cleaner when everyone at the table truly belongs." No one said my name. No one needed to. Andrew laughed too late. A small nervous sound meant to bury the insult. Mason kept looking at the cake, unaware of the knife just laid across his family. I set my glass down. The stem touched the linen with a tiny click. Then I straightened Elaine's coat, placed both palms flat on the table, and stood. Silence noticed me before Andrew did. That was enough for me. I crossed the dining room without hurrying. Anger will make a young man stomp. Age teaches you that quiet feet can frighten people more. The carpet swallowed every step. The piano kept playing. A waiter paused with a silver tray balanced on one hand, then remembered his training and moved aside. Andrew saw me when I was about 10 feet from the brass screen. The laughter left his face so quickly it looked unplugged. For half a second, I saw the boy who had once broken my socket wrench and hidden it under his bed. Then, the man returned, the polished developer, the husband at a rich table, the son trying to manage a problem before anyone important noticed. "Dad," he said, rising fast, "what are you doing here?" "Having Thanksgiving dinner," I said. "Same as you." His eyes flicked toward Lenora, then Vanessa, then Mason. "Can we talk outside? I just got here." He stepped in front of me, lowering his voice. "Listen, the Denver thing changed. The investors postponed. Vanessa's birthday was already planned. I was going to call you after dinner. You told me you were boarding a flight." "I know. I handled it badly." His hand came toward my sleeve. I moved just enough that he touched only air. "Please don't do this here. Not in front of Vanessa's mother, not in front of Mason." That was the first honest thing he had said all day. He was not worried about hurting me. He was worried about being seen. "I'm not here to embarrass you, Andrew." He swallowed. "Then what are you here to do?" I looked past him at Mason, who had finally noticed me. His mouth opened slightly. "Grandpa." The sound of that word nearly changed my mind. Nearly. I walked around Andrew and reached the table. Vanessa went still, then assembled a smile so quickly I almost admired the craftsmanship. "Thomas," she said. "What a surprise. Happy birthday." "Vanessa," I said. 39 looks expensive." Her smile tightened. Lenora turned slowly in her chair. She did not look shocked. Women like Lenora treat surprise as something other people do. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "I wasn't aware you were joining us. I wasn't aware I'd been excluded." A small silence opened around the table. I turned to Mason. "You've gotten taller." He looked from me to his father. "Dad said you were staying home tonight." I know what he said. Andrew was behind me now. I could feel his panic pressing against my back. "Dad," he warned softly. Mason watched us carefully, old enough to feel the crack forming. I reached into the inside pocket of Elaine's coat and took out my phone. My thumb found the banking app before anyone at that table understood the evening had already changed. "Relax," I said. "This won't take long." I held the phone low enough that it did not look theatrical. That mattered to me. Men who shout want witnesses. Men who act only need the right password. The banking app opened with my fingerprint for a second. My own reflection stared back from the dark edge of the screen. Old face. Steady eyes. Elaine's coat collar against my jaw. I went first to the family operating account, the one Andrew had been using for years as if his name were carved into it by God, instead of added by my permission. Authorized user. That was the phrase lawyers loved because it sounded harmless, until the day it stopped being harmless. Andrew had access. He had cards. He had spending authority. He had the luxury of forgetting who actually owned the account. I tapped his profile. Andrew Whitaker active. I selected suspend access. The app asked for confirmation. I gave it. Across the table. Andrew's phone vibrated. His face changed before he even looked down. "Dad," he said quietly. I moved to the second account, the business reserve line tied to Whitaker Harbor Development, backed not by Andrew's brilliance, not by Lenora's approval, and certainly not by Vanessa's birthday smile, but by my personal guarantee, $2.4 million of my name, my credit history, my 40 years of clean contracts and paid debts holding up the image my son sold to men in glass offices. I submitted the formal review request. Pending guarantee freeze 48 hours. Confirmed. Andrew stepped closer. "What are you doing?" I looked up at him then. "Adjusting exposure?" Lenora's eyes narrowed. She understood that phrase. Vanessa did not. Not yet. Mason looked from my phone to his father, waiting for someone to tell him this was ordinary. It was not ordinary. "The cards linked to my accounts will no longer work for you," I said. "The business guarantee is now under review. Until I decide otherwise. Your access is suspended. You can't just—" "I can." My voice did not rise. That was why the table went silent. I placed the phone face down beside Vanessa's untouched champagne. "For years, I let you use what I built because you were my son. Tonight you looked me in the eye, told me you were flying to Denver, and used my trust as a curtain to hide behind." Andrew's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Around us, the dining room had quieted in widening circles. I looked at him one last time. "Your mistake was thinking a quiet father was an empty one." Andrew moved first, because men who are losing control often reach for whatever object still lets them pretend they have some. He snatched the leather bill folder from beside Vanessa's plate and pulled out his black card, the heavy one he liked to lay down at restaurants, as if it were a closing argument. He handed it to the waiter without looking at him. "Run that," he said. The waiter disappeared toward the service station. For those 40 seconds, no one spoke. The candles burned. The harbor lights trembled in the glass. Vanessa stared at Andrew's profile, waiting for him to prove this was all a misunderstanding. Lenora watched me instead. The waiter returned with the card resting on the tray. "I'm sorry, sir," he said carefully. It was declined. A small sound came from Vanessa's throat. Andrew took the card as if it had betrayed him personally. "Try it again." "I did, sir." He reached for his wallet and produced a second card. Thinner, less impressive, the kind of backup men carry when they do not expect anyone to see it. The waiter took it. Andrew kept his eyes on me while we waited. Anger blooming over panic like paint over rust. The waiter came back faster this time. That one was declined as well. The table changed. Not loudly. Social collapses rarely announce themselves. They happen in glances, in posture, in the way guests suddenly become fascinated by their napkins. Vanessa whispered. "Andrew." Lenora set her fork down with surgical precision. "Explain." "It's a banking glitch," Andrew said, already unlocking his phone. "Holiday fraud protection, I'll call them. It'll be cleared in 5 minutes." But his thumb hovered over the screen. He knew. And I knew he knew. There was no department to charm, no junior banker to pressure, no emergency override hidden behind his title. For the first time, all night, my son looked exactly as wealthy as he was without me. Not at all in that polished room. "The accounts are mine," I said. Andrew stared at me as if the English language had become negotiable. "Your name was never on them as an owner. You were an authorized user. That means I gave you access. It does not mean I gave you possession." Vanessa looked from him to me. Lenora's face hardened in a way that told me she understood every word. "You built your image on my credit, my signature, my patience," I continued. "Tonight I withdrew the patience." Andrew's voice dropped. "You're destroying me over one dinner." "No?" I said. Dinner was just where I finally saw clearly. I looked at Mason, then back at my son. This is because you looked your father in the eye, lied, and taught your own boy to help you hide it. Mason's face changed first. He looked at Andrew, then at me. And I watched a boy begin to understand that the adults around him had been arranging reality without his permission. Dad told me you wanted to stay home, Mason said. Andrew turned sharply. Mason. Not now. But the warning came too late. The room had already made space for the truth. Mason swallowed. He said Grandpa was tired. That Thanksgiving was too much for him this year. He said we shouldn't pressure him. Vanessa's eyes moved to Andrew. You said Thomas declined. I said he needed rest, Andrew snapped, then caught himself because everyone heard the difference. Mason kept going. Softer now. Almost ashamed. I asked if I could call him. Dad said no. Because he didn't want me making Grandpa feel guilty. The words landed harder than the declined cards. I looked at my grandson. You did nothing wrong. His eyes shone. But he fought it. Good boy. Too young to carry adult deceit. Old enough to feel humiliated by it. Vanessa pushed her chair back an inch. Andrew. What is going on? He turned toward her. Desperate. It was complicated. Lenora leaned back, studying him with a coldness that made even me feel the temperature drop. Complicated is what men say when the simple version makes them look small. Then Vanessa said the thing Andrew had feared most. The Brookline deposit, she whispered. Andrew's head snapped toward her. She looked at her mother. Then at me. We need those accounts open. The earnest money clears in 9 days. Andrew told me the funding was secured. Lenora's expression tightened. Not with sympathy, but with arithmetic. I could see her subtracting Andrew from every grand plan she had attached to him. Andrew stood alone now, surrounded by the people he had tried to impress with borrowed strength. I picked up Elaine's coat from the chair beside me. There was nothing left for me to expose. My son's lies had learned to speak without my help. And everyone at the table heard them. I left the table before Andrew could find another excuse. There are moments when staying becomes a kind of begging, and I had done enough of that over the years. I walked back through the harbor lantern with my shoulders straight, past candles, polished silver, and strangers pretending not to watch an old man reclaim himself in public. Marianne was waiting near the host stand with Elaine's gray coat folded over her arm. Mr. Whitaker, she said softly. I reached for my wallet. The wine. No charge tonight. Her eyes held mine just long enough to say what good people say when words would make kindness smaller. I nodded, took the coat, and stepped through the glass doors into the cold. Boston air came off the harbor sharp. It slipped under my collar and settled against my neck. For a minute, I stood beneath the awning and let it clear the heat from my face. Behind me, through the glass, the restaurant still glowed like nothing had happened. That is the thing about public ruin. The room survives it better than the people do. Grandpa, I turned. Mason pushed through the door at a run. One side of his shirt untucked, his tie loose, his cheeks red from panic. He stopped 2 steps above me, breathing hard. I didn't know, he said. I swear I didn't know you were here alone. I believe you. Dad said you wanted the quiet night. He said you were tired and didn't want anybody making a big thing out of Thanksgiving. His voice cracked, and he hated that it did. I would have called. I would have come over. I put a hand on his shoulder. He was taller than I remembered. Mason, none of this belongs to you. He looked down, then back up. I tried calling you last week from Dad's phone. Twice. It never went through. Just this weird, fast, busy sound. But when I called from mine, you picked up. The sentence hung between us, cold as the harbor wind. I kept my face calm because he deserved one adult who would not make him carry the whole truth at once. No, I said. That wasn't a network problem. Mason's eyes filled with something older than 15. He lied to me too. He whispered. I squeezed his shoulder. Yes, I said. He did. Mason wiped his face with his sleeve, trying to blame cold wind instead of tears. I let him have that. Listen to me, I said. Your education fund is safe. He blinked. What? I set it up the week you were born. Not through your father, not through your mother. An independent trust. $980,000. And not $1 of it can be borrowed against, redirected, or used to fix an adult's mistake. His mouth opened, but no words came. College. Trade school. Whatever road you choose after that, it belongs to your future, not their panic. For the first time that night, his face loosened. You did that for me. I did it because your grandmother loved you before you could say her name. The door behind him opened slightly, then closed. Go back inside, I said. Be kind to your mother tonight, but remember who told you the truth. I watched Mason step back inside. Then I turned toward the harbor instead of the curb. A car would have been warmer. Walking was cleaner. I needed the cold to scrape the restaurant off my skin. The waterfront path was empty, lit by amber lamps and the silver chop of water. Boston looked expensive from a distance, all glass and confidence. But the harbor did not care who had a black card or whose mother-in-law approved. It kept moving, dark and honest. I stopped near a bench where Elaine and I had eaten clam chowder from paper cups, because the restaurant we wanted had lost our reservation. She had laughed so hard at my irritation that I forgot to be irritated. That was marriage at its best, not perfect, two people quietly returning each other to themselves. I took out my phone. But not for Andrew's accounts this time. I opened the investment app no one in my family knew existed, 5 years earlier. After Elaine died, I had started reading at night because sleep had become unreliable. Index funds, municipal bonds, tax loss harvesting, cash ladders, boring words, useful words, words a lonely man could turn into shelter. The balance sat on the screen. $260,000. Not inherited, not borrowed, not managed by Andrew. Mine. I stared at it until the number stopped looking like revenge and started looking like proof. I had not disappeared just because my son had stopped seeing me. My phone rang. Andrew. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, he said. And the performance was gone. We need to talk. In person. I looked out at black water. Then come to my apartment, I said, and bring the truth this time. Rain had started by the time I reached my building. The hard November kind that seemed determined to wash the whole evening into the gutter. Cal was gone, replaced by the night doorman, who held the door and pretended not to notice my expression. I thanked him, rode upstairs, hung Elaine's coat carefully over a chair, and put the kettle on. Andrew arrived 26 minutes later. When I opened the door, he looked less like a successful developer than a man who had been left outside his own life. His suit was soaked at the shoulders, his tie hung loose. Rainwater darkened his hair and ran along one side of his face. But he stepped inside with anger, doing the work pride could no longer manage. You embarrassed me, he said before the door was fully closed. I looked at him. Good evening to you? Too. Don't do that. He moved into the living room without being invited, pacing immediately. You walked into Vanessa's birthday, shut down my cards, threatened my company, and made me look like a fraud in front of Lenora. You did that last part yourself. He turned sharply. I was trying to manage a difficult situation. No, I said, taking 2 mugs from the cabinet. You were trying to manage me. I didn't want Thanksgiving to become some emotional performance, he snapped. You get quiet. You make people feel guilty. Vanessa already had plans. Lenora had guests coming. I thought it would be easier if you believed I was away. I poured hot water over the tea bags and let the silence answer him first. Easier for whom, I asked. He rubbed both hands over his face. For a moment, he looked exhausted instead of cruel. And that was almost worse. Cruelty can be fought. Weakness dressed as necessity asked to be understood. For everyone, he said. No. For you. He laughed once, bitter and small. You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under. The Brookline property, the investors, Vanessa's expectations, her mother breathing down my neck. I am trying to keep this family at a level you don't understand. I set 1 mug on the table in front of him. I built steel frames for buildings taller than your ambition, I said. Don't mistake quiet for ignorance. His jaw worked, but no sentence came. I sat across from him. Now, I said. Tell me what else you used my name for. Tonight. Andrew. Not tomorrow. Not after another lie. Start with everything. I stood and went to the bookcase before Andrew could answer. On the lower shelf, behind tax folders, was the leather album Elaine had kept with the care she gave to ordinary miracles, not the stage photographs. The real ones. I laid it on the coffee table and opened to a picture of Andrew at 8, standing in my fabrication shop with oversized safety goggles, holding a wrench like a trophy. You followed me that whole summer, I said. Asked why beams didn't fall, asked why men shook hands after signing contracts. Andrew stared at the page. I turned another. His 16th birthday. A dented blue pickup parked outside our building. Not new, not impressive. But his. Elaine had tied a red bow to the antenna. He was smiling so hard his ears turned pink. That truck cost less than your dinner tonight, I said. But you hugged your mother like we had given you the moon. The rain tapped the windows. Before money. Before Lenora. Before polished lies, my son had once known how to receive love freely without being ashamed of it. I reached into the drawer beside my chair and took out the printed statements I had prepared that morning. Before I ever knew Andrew would lie to me, I placed them on top of the bed and pored over my 16-year-old smile. He looked down. His eyes moved the way a finance man's eyes move when numbers stop being relational and start becoming a verdict. $2.16 million. Not yours to manage, not yours to borrow against, not yours to explain to your mother-in-law. He sat back slowly. The room seemed to shrink around him. I thought you needed me, he said. That was your favorite mistake. For the first time. Shame crossed his face without anger covering it. Then he looked at the floor. The New Hampshire cabin, he said. My hand tightened on the armrest. He kept going because he understood there was nowhere left to hide. I used the old power of attorney from 2019. I knew it had expired. I needed bridge money for the Brookline deposit. I was going to replace it before you noticed. That cabin was where Elaine and I spent 21 Octobers. I looked at him and felt something sacred close forever. By 6 the next morning, Boston had been rinsed clean. The rain left the streets shining under delivery trucks and early office lights. I made coffee. Not because I wanted it, but because men from my generation believe hot coffee can hold a day together. Nora Bennett called at 6:40. Elaine's closest friend, mine too, though neither of us had ever said it that way. Tom, she said, tell me you know what you're doing. I know enough. She would hate the ugliness. She would hate the lying more. Nora went quiet, then she said, then finish it clean. So I did. At 9, I walked into the private banking office of Gregory Bell, a man I had once helped when he was a nervous 26-year-old loan officer trying to understand construction risk. Now, he had a corner office, silver hair, and the authority of someone people stopped interrupting. I did not beg. I did not smear my son. I laid out documents: the expired power of attorney, the unauthorized cabin withdrawal, the suspended accounts, the guarantee exposure. Gregory read everything twice. Finally, he removed his glasses. A man who misuses his father's trust will misuse a partner's. By noon, Andrew received notice. His development review was being moved from his team to Gregory himself. Family shame had become professional consequence. And Andrew knew it instantly. By 11, I was in Elliot Mercer's office, signing documents on a desk older than both of us. Elliot had been Elaine's estate attorney, and he still kept a photograph of her charity dinner on his shelf. The education trust is irrevocable, he said. $980,000 for Mason. No parent can borrow against it, dissolve it, redirect it, or punish him through it. I signed. Elliot slid the revised allocation forward. Elaine would approve. I believed him. Love needed paper when blood forgot decency. Andrew's office overlooked the harbor. All glass, steel, and borrowed confidence. He was standing when I walked in. Clean suit. Eyes tired enough to tell me he had not slept. I placed a folder on his desk. What is this? He asked. Your choice. He opened it. I watched him read the revised terms: 10% retained interest, no access to my accounts, no authority over the New Hampshire cabin, no contact restrictions between Mason and me, and 12 months to prove he could behave like a son instead of a dependent with better shoes. His face tightened. 10% more than dishonesty usually earns. He looked at the last page. And if I fail, then the remainder moves into Mason's trust and charitable housing grants in your mother's name. That hurt him. Some lessons need a pulse. He sank into his chair. What does respect even look like to you? Dad, I leaned forward. Call me when you don't need money. Tell me the truth before it becomes convenient. Bring Mason to see me without making him feel guilty for loving his grandfather. And understand this: what Elaine and I built was a life, not a credit line, not a mask for your ambition. His eyes lowered. I'm sorry about the cabin, he said. I believe you're sorry you were caught, I said. Be better than that. I walked home slower than usual. Not because I was weak, but because for the first time in years, I was not carrying Andrew. The harbor wind followed me through the streets. Cal saw me enter and tilted his head. You look lighter, Mr. Whitaker. I suppose I am. At 4:52 that afternoon, Mason knocked. He stood with his backpack on one shoulder, coat unzipped, hair messy from wind. Can I come in? You never have to ask that. He sat at my kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug of tea I had already made. For a while, we talked about ordinary things: school, basketball tryouts, A history teacher who assigned too much reading. Ordinary felt holy. Dad's been quiet, Mason said eventually. Mom too. The house feels like everyone's walking around broken glass. Sometimes people need to hear the floor crack before they stop pretending it's solid. He thought about that. Then nodded like he was saving it for later, before he left. He hugged me at the door. No embarrassment, no hurry. Just his arms around my shoulders. His cheek against my coat, the simple weight of love that had not been negotiated. Same time next week, he asked. Same time next week. After he was gone, I carried my coffee to the balcony. Boston spread below me. Cold and bright, the harbor moving beyond the rooftops like it had somewhere better to be. Elaine would have loved the color of that sky. I had not won my son back. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way I once wanted. But I had stopped paying for my own erasure. Real revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is a signed document, a blocked lie, a grandson at your table. And one old man finally understanding he does not need permission to exist.